Chapter 4, Time to Upload. This was Jeff Hunter's day to be on duty as the assigned array operator for the very large array center, and so far it had shaped up to be a pretty normal day. The morning had been a little slower than usual with visitor traffic, but the afternoon visitor traffic was beginning to pick up. He usually liked to take time with visitors or the special tour groups as well as field all the questions about the array and what type of scientific work they were all doing at the center. Alice Stevens, Hunter's afternoon assistant, had just come on duty at noon and was busy following her assigned checklist for one of the experiments being conducted in the afternoon on the array. She smiled at Hunter when she saw him walk in. "Good afternoon, Mr. Hunter. Good to see you today." Hunter had just returned from the cafeteria after finishing his normal lunch break. He was a little surprised to see Alice Stevens working today. Surprised, but he was genuinely pleased nonetheless. "Well, Miss Stevens, it's good to see you. We're in luck so far, it's shaping up to be a nice quiet weekend." He grinned and gave her a friendly wink. "Alice, I'm sorry you got scheduled at the last minute for this weekend duty. I guess Joyce Dempsey's still not over the flu. I hope you didn't have any pressing social plans?" Hunter asked. Usually, Alice Stevens worked the first part of the week, and Joyce Dempsey would work the weekend shift. "What, me have social plans?" she joked. "Not since Ted and I broke up last month," Stevens added. "I'm sorry to hear that, Alice. I didn't realize," Hunter apologized, although it was more of a half apology, since secretly it was news he was delighted to hear. "That's okay, Mr. Hunter. I think my folks were actually relieved to hear the news. They were afraid that we were getting far too serious in our relationship, at least until I finish school," Stevens said, lowering her voice to a whisper. "Actually, I think it was their way of telling me they really didn't like Ted." Hunter was looking over the afternoon radio feeds for one of the scheduled observations and checking frequency calibrations when he heard an alarm going off on his main computer in the observation center. "That's strange," he thought. He turned around quickly and walked over to the operation center, looking over several of the large computer monitors that might help him pinpoint the source for the alarm. "Hey Alice, do you know if someone's using the antennas for any special observations this afternoon that we didn't know about?" Hunter asked. "None that I'm aware of, Mr. Hunter. Just the observation I was calibrating earlier with Thomas Drake, who is here this week from the U of A." Alice motioned to Drake, who was busy tapping away at one of the other computer workstations. "I was set to start on Drake's calibration routines for his deep space project, and also help set up some afternoon experiments with Dr. Robertson and his team from the University of New Mexico." She paused for a second, when something she saw outside the windows that caught her attention. "What on earth is going on with the antennas?" Alice pointed outside. "Look, Mr. Hunter, they are all repositioning themselves," said a rather excited Stevens. As things grew more unpredictable, several more computer alarms began going off. "Wow, will you get a load of this? The mod comps are lit up like Christmas trees," yelled Drake from his workstation on the other side of the room. "It seems that someone else is accessing them," exclaimed Drake. "And it's not one of us." Drake was one of the young doctoral students visiting from Tucson. He had been working on a special deep space research project at the University of Arizona. Hunter, who was getting more agitated by the minute, began taking a closer look out the windows. Hunter could see that each of the 27 large antennae dishes were now moving together in sequence. What were they being aimed at, and more importantly, who was controlling them? He wondered. As things began to get crazier by the moment, Hunter decided to double-check the radio feeds. Suddenly, several phones within the main control center began ringing. Hunter rolled his eyes. "Oh, that's just swell," he thought. "I got it," said Stevens, picking up the main line. "Drake, can you grab one of those other lines for me, please?" Stevens asked. Hunter returned to his workstation to look over the monitors again and see if he might have missed something as he looked over and saw Stevens, who had just hung up the main phone line from Array Operations Center in Socorro. "Well?" he asked Stevens. "That was Dr. Gianna from the main Operations Center. It seems that several other array sites that are on our grid are also experiencing the same problem we are. Their antennas are unexplainably repositioning themselves, exclaimed Stevens. Miss Stevens. Mr. Drake, as soon as those antennas stop moving, I want you two to find out what exactly they're aiming at, and who might be using them, okay? Monitor all bands and frequencies. I need to know what the hell is going on. Hunter pulled down and opened the emergency manual that was kept on the wall behind his desk. It was placed there years ago for just such an occasion. Meanwhile, I will make some phone calls and find out protocols for something like this. Hunter sat down at his workstation and began searching for some explanation to what was happening. Hey everyone, you're not going to believe this. It seems someone is using these antennas to transmit data, and lots of it, hollered Drake from his workstation. This is unbelievable. I didn't know you could do this. Hunter's facial expression began tying in knots. You can't. The system wasn't designed for this, only for receiving. A very puzzled Hunter replied, looking around at his computers. Nothing he was seeing was making any sense at all. He paused and took a deep breath. This is weird, he thought. I think we are going to have to shut down the entire center. He glanced down at the emergency manual for a moment, and then continued. At least until we find out what the hell is going on. Anyone know if there's a way that we can re-record this outgoing data transmission? He looked at Stevens, who shrugged. Then he looked at Drake. I think we might be able to do that. I'll give it a try. Drake began frantically typing away on his workstation. Good, start recording everything as soon as you can, Drake. We want to save as much as we can, got it? Hunter asked. Got it, I'm on it, replied Drake. Alice, let's try to find out where this signal is coming from and where these data transmissions are being sent. We need to know what is happening here. I will call the AOC and let them know. We must shut down this center ASAP. Let's go, folks, Hunter barked, and then he breathed a heavy sigh. So much for a normal day, he thought. No sooner had Uncle Rodney finished loading the SUV and closing the rear doors, than several different alarms and noises could be heard sounding from all over the visitor center. Dad, Uncle Rodney, look, the antennas, they are all moving around. Leanne yelled excitedly. Are they supposed to be doing that? She was pointing in the direction of the large dish antennas that were moving and repositioning the direction of their aim towards the sky. Bobby hastily retrieved her camera from its case and began shooting pictures as well as videos of the excitement. Several people who had still been inside the visitor center were also coming outside to watch. No, Lee, they don't normally do that. Something's up, I suppose, that we didn't hear about on the tour, said Alex, mesmerized by the sight. You know, guys, we should probably get moving along, Alex suggested. As they were all climbing hurriedly into the SUV, they heard an announcement coming over the loudspeakers at the visitor center. Ladies and gentlemen, the visitor center in VLA complex will be temporarily closing for the remainder of the day. We thank you for visiting us today and we hope you enjoyed your visit. We apologize for any inconvenience. However, due to current operations and for your safety, we are asking that all visitors and guests please return to your vehicles as soon as possible, as we will be closing the main operation and visitor center in 15 minutes. Thank you again, and have a nice day. The message then began to repeat. Well, that was good timing. Looks like they are closing the place down, said Grandpa JJ. He caught Jimmy's eye in the back seat. He was staring at him peculiarly, then turned away to watch the activity outside. Something strange was going on. Jimmy had been acting unusual all afternoon for some reason. He sensed it but couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. Moments later, after waiting in line with the rest of the visitors who were leaving for the day, they were back on the highway and heading home to Uncle Rodney's house. Jimmy just stared out the window to the mountains in the distance, and then gazed down worriedly at the backpack that he still held tightly in his lap. I will be in contact with you again, they had said. Jimmy nervously began to wonder what other surprises would be next. The Operation and Visitor Center had now been emptied of all non-essential personnel except for the necessary technicians working on maintaining the equipment and support staff personnel. Hunter, Stevens, and Drake were now joined in their efforts in the control room by Dr. Mark Robertson and two of his grad students from the University of New Mexico, who had been working on a special project that afternoon. Okay, Anyone got any ideas what's been going on here? If you have any at all, I would love to hear them. Hunter, who had been pacing back and forth for the last hour, paused for a moment to look over his workstation screens for the 100th time this afternoon, scratching his head. Drake was the first to break the silence. Well, for one thing, there haven't been any more transmissions since the initial transmission nearly an hour ago. Drake tapped on his keyboard again. And we were able to record about 80% of the transmission, or roughly about 3 minutes of it. However, there was a lot of data sent in those 3 minutes, he said, looking up at Hunter, whose expression looked as if he was expecting more than that. We're talking nearly 2 terabits, replied Drake enthusiastically. Stevens took that as an opportunity to jump right in. I was able to isolate the frequency of the transmission, and you're not going to believe this. She paused, looking over at Hunter, who was peering over his workstation to where she was sitting. Well? You got something or not? Hunter asked sarcastically. It had been a stressful afternoon, and any humor he had once upon a time had left him, it seemed. He could see a grin forming on Stevens' face. Usually, he was fond of Stevens, but right now he was just about ready to strangle her. 1420.4 megahertz, Stevens replied firmly. That brought a quick silence in the room, followed by several footsteps from all directions. She smiled at Hunter, whose facial expression suddenly changed from anger to complete surprise. I'll be damned, hydrogen, said Drake, excitedly. It's like we were now broadcasting to the whole universe with a big neon sign saying, "Hello, here we are," he shouted. Drake seemed to be enjoying all this just a bit too much for Hunter, who just added Drake to his list of people to strangle next. That's it? Asked Hunter. Are you sure? Hunter shook his head. Why would someone go to all this trouble to do that? It doesn't make any sense. Who would want to do that? There was an awkward pause, quickly broken. No, Mr. Hunter, the real question right now is, how was someone able to do that, and who was listening? A strange new voice boomed from the rear of the operations center. When they all turned to see the source of the voice, there were 3 people standing behind them in full Air Force uniform. Good afternoon. It looks like you folks could use some help, spoke the taller man in the middle with the stripes and medals on his uniform. Let me introduce myself. I am Major General Bruce Coulter, and these 2 are my assistants, Colonel Eric Tashima and Lieutenant Colonel Karen Schmidt. Coulter motioned to his 2 assistants. We are part of a special team that was put together several years ago between the Department of Defense Space Division, the NSA, and NASA. We just flew in here a few minutes ago from Holloman Air Force Base. You don't need to worry about the details, folks, just know this, that as of 1230 hours this afternoon, this civilian research facility has been placed under my authority, and is now closed as a matter of national security until further notice. This is just swell, thought Hunter. Just when I thought I was finished with military service, now I feel like I've been suddenly re-enlisted. General Coulter slowly paced the room as he continued, scrutinizing each of the monitors and workstations as he passed. More equipment and personnel will soon be arriving by helicopter, and that should help us get to the bottom of this. He paused. Oh, and by the way, everyone here is under quarantine until further notice. Under no circumstance will you be allowed contact with anyone on the outside of this facility. Your families will be notified that you are all safe. They will all be given a similar cover story for your absence. Hopefully, the sooner we all get to the bottom of this, the sooner everyone can go home. No replies came, just stunned silence. General Coulter smiled. Very well then. Coulter turned quickly and left the room. Hunter breathed out a deep sigh and looked around the room at the others, who sat with dazed expressions on their faces. Hunter just added 3 more names to the top of his list.